When it comes to the wolf, the fox, and the leopard, in focusing not only on how animals become domesticated, but sometimes humans as well, it can present something that is both heartbreaking and also strangely invigorating toward the end. So, to summarize the film, it's set up to make it so that the main entity, who's known as One, Wolf, Alice, whichever, we focus on her story, which is based off of a scientist's book being adapted. One, the wolf, Alice, whichever you want to use, she was found in the woods amongst a group of wolves and is taken from there by scientists. One being the scientist who wrote the book, and she gets kidnapped by some two odd people. One known as Wyona, who's the fox, and Alias, who's the leopard. They try to raise her in a way that's isolated from the world because she's supposed to be the one who saves them all. And in the process of taking her away from the woods and try to domesticate her, try to make her more human, you see a transformation when it comes to her that is, in the beginning, you see this push to give her humanity, even if it's this ideal form that Wyona and Alias have. But in an effort to try to make her more human, you see she kind of loses herself in the process. And watching Jessica Reynolds go through this arc is truly, getting to the review section, magnificent. For it's not just the physicality is definitely notable, but it's also about just getting a sense how she's losing herself. And in many ways, it gives you a very different version of coming of age. For coming of age, usually, especially when it comes to girls, they kind of paint it as something generally sexual for some reason. But when it comes to how Jessica Reynolds handles it with David Verbeek, who's a writer-director, we get something very different in a way that it's kind of hard to explain because it is definitely a bit of a weird movie. But as we go through different chapters, as we see her physically transform, kind of lose that wolf, kind of lose everything that made her vivacious and alive, it's a bit heartbreaking because you can see, even though in our minds, society, she wasn't possibly thriving in the forest, at the same time she was happy. She had her pack. She was surviving in a way that allowed her to feel whole. Yet as they chisel away to her like some type of marble in Michelangelo or whoever's shop, they didn't chisel her away into something that was beautiful and perfect. They took parts away from her, and that's kind of the way that it's presented when it comes to how One, the wolf, Alice, is going through. She eventually kind of becomes this person known as Alice, who kind of gives you the vibe of somebody who's on Ritalin, I guess you can say. Like all that chaotic energy, craziness, being their whole self in a way has now become muted to the point where they're just a cog in the machine. And depending on how you live your life, it can kind of remind you of when you was a kid. You had this big, beautiful imagination. You would do all these crazy, zany, whimsical, uninhibited things. But then you became a teenager. You became kind of curious about the outside world, and people was giving you all this different stimuli about how it was. And you realize that those people didn't necessarily have maybe a best interest at heart. Maybe the ideas of the world don't really go with how you see it. But after a certain point, you see that, the world, I don't want to say it's a terrible place, but it is a place that is not made necessarily for you to question it, for you to fully be alive. And so comes the question if you're going to just let your inner child die, or if you're going to figure out a way to bring it back to life. As we see at points, Alice, the one, the wolf, really tried to do and even beg sometimes to do. With all that said though, when it comes to the on-the-fence portion, a lot of things don't get answered, and that's because being that this whole story is supposed to be based off of a character, what is her name? Dr. Tanaka's book, certain things when it comes to Alice, the one, the wolf's life, isn't something that the doctor's aware of. So in the chapters, each one focuses on a different part of the wolf Alice's life. And sadly, that means every time we go to a different chapter of her life, there's a huge amount of information missing. Like, how did she get from one point to the other? And that is especially something that is glaringly an issue, perhaps for some, when it goes from when the wolf goes from the one to Alice, where she goes from being under the leopard and the fox's care to now seemingly being on her own in some ways. It's hard to say exactly what's going on. I mean, you see her standing up straight. She has a little job as a cashier, and you're just trying to figure out, how does she go from this seemingly abandoned oil rig to now being some type of clerk at a mini mart or a supermarket. There's just so much missing, and it includes when you go from chapter 1, when she was the wolf, to the one. And if you're someone who's really about the details of how A led to B, C, D, and how we ended up at Z, that could possibly bug you. But what may bug you the most is that, as much as Jessica Reynolds gives a notable and commanding performance, when it comes to the supporting characters, they do their job in supporting the lead and helping pushing their story along, but they don't really give you much to care about them or who they are beyond what they can be in service of to the lead. And for some people, again, this is on the fence topic, you may prefer when supporting characters know their role and shut their mouth when they're not supposed to be helping the lead move on with their journey. But for me, I'm one of those people who, if you're cast in a movie, even if you're not a scene stealer, you need to have some type of impact. You need to do more than just show up, say your lines, and do it well enough where you don't become a problem. And for me, whether you want to talk about Dr. Tanaka, whether you talk about the wolf, whether you talk about the fox, or maybe even the other characters involved, including one character who is featured prominently in the trailer yet really has no real place in the film, I just feel like you should have something special about you where you're not necessarily taken away from the lead, but at the same time, in a different light or different shift of focus, you could be imagined as someone who could be the lead, if that makes sense. But overall, Jessica Reynolds makes this worth watching. And yes, it is definitely a very odd film, but it's one of those odd films where if you're someone who is willing to watch a 2-hour film, if you're someone who likes things that are a bit stray away from the mainstream, this is the type of film that you want to watch. It's one of those things where it pops up on Netflix, looks kind of weird, but you find out it's completely worth it. Now, if you're also a mainstream person who likes things that are a bit more simple, much more straightforward, I would say if you're willing to take a different walk, this is good for you, but otherwise it may not be your cup of tea.